it's a process. It's an information-driven process. So if we're producing data for particular purposes, it supports that process.
Within the ever-expanding world of construction technology, there is one process that is a constant. It can sometimes feel like it is the only way to create that single source of truth which most tech needs to function and more organizations need to successfully deliver projects. I am, of course, talking about BIM, Building Information Modeling. And even though it's been around, in theory, since the 1970s, it wasn't until the 80s that BIM, as we know it now, started to become the software we use today, which is quite a lengthy period of time for technology to advance. And with these advances came more sophisticated ways of utilizing BIM as a tool within construction. The only real ceiling to this being the computer power we place behind it. Now, it would be foolish for us not to cover BIM in some detail here, due to its importance. We need to speak to someone who knows a thing or two about it. Our guest today is Paul Wilkinson, who has been working in construction industry marketing and PR for over 30 years and has become a leading authority on the use of construction collaboration technology platforms. What started out as a temporary job has lasted, in various guises, over the last 3 decades. Writing about construction IT, Paul produced a guide on website development for construction IT in 2000 and has contributed technology chapters to several books on construction business development, collaborative working, and e-business in construction, leading to the release of his own book, Construction Collaboration Technologies, the Extranet Evolution, in 2005. More recently, Paul's experience has focused on SaaS, Software as a Service, Web 2.0, and BIM, as well as public speaking and lecturing. And he's also the Vice Chair of NEMA, formerly the UK BIM Alliance. Paul, welcome to the podcast. And did I miss anything off that intro?
No, I think you covered it all pretty much there. There's some stuff I'd almost forgotten.
Fantastic. I get that quite a lot, actually. People saying that was quite eloquently put, and I'm quite surprised all the stuff that I've done, which is always good to hear. Okay, excellent. Right, let's get right into this. As my intro alluded to, we're going to be talking about BIM today. And according to Construction Digital, BIM systems act as a matrix, for those that don't know, connecting up an entire building so you can gain actionable insights into data coming from your smart systems. So basically, it's the matrix for construction without having to choose between a blue or a red pill. Can you break it down for us here? Why is it that BIM seems to have become the heartbeat of most technological advancements in construction?
BIM is all about information, and information has always been right at the heart of all construction activities. Even before we were dealing with the electronic opportunities, we were exchanging information in paper, but it was still information. And we were moving paper around in vast quantities. I joined a civil engineering organization in 1987, and they had rooms full of people making designs on drawing boards. By the time I left 7 years later, they'd moved to CAD, computer-aided drafting or computer-aided design, and were working more electronically. And the process has continued almost unabated ever since. Building information modeling or building information management has been around for 20 years or so. And it is really the latest manifestation of how we exchange information. And it's a powerful way of connecting all stages of information development and use. The reason we went electronic was that it was more economic to do so. It took less time to update drawings rather than having to produce them from scratch every time we did new revisions. So we now have that opportunity not only to create information once and then use it many times, but also to revise it more quickly and particularly these days, to track its use through the whole process, and that helps enable better collaboration. We can share information more quickly and easily with those that we need to collaborate, because nobody does design on their own, nobody does construction on their own. They always have to work with other partners, and that's where information sits in this role, and building information management and the whole area of electronic communication generally sits at the very heart of supporting that collaborative effort in construction.
Okay, excellent. So eloquently put, and nothing more than I'd expect from yourself, Paul. But
Thank you.
I'd quite like to get into a bit of the nitty gritty here, because it's not without its challenges, and it's not like you said, we went from paper to more digital tools, and it's not like that hasn't changed over time, and we'll get into what all that kind of stuff means in a little bit. But what I'd like to understand now, I think we can all agree that tech never stands still, and it makes sense to always keep a keen eye on the future and what's coming up, especially in construction. Now, buildings are supposed to last for decades, if not centuries, or at least they were. And let's not get into that argument in terms of how modern day houses are built, because that's not for here. But in terms of the technology making advances and integrating into these buildings, I suppose that needs to stand the test of time as well, if we're building for the future and longevity of buildings to last a longer time. So that means taking more traditional approaches and updating them into something that is more future proof, like you were saying, with drawings, and then into the digital realm. With BIM specifically, what are the challenges here, and can we truly make these giant industry-wide technological changes stick within the wider construction community?
I think we can. We've been doing it for a long time. I mean, as I mentioned, we were starting to make those changes back in the 90s. And this was before we had the World Wide Web and the internet really embedded in our everyday working. We've seen challenges that the industry, the construction sector, has particularly faced, that relate not so much to the technology but more to the structure of the industry. It is a sector which has historically underinvested in IT. Businesses used to see information technology as an overhead, and the construction sector is, if you look at some of the work that's come out of McKinsey, one of the least digitized industry sectors of all. There was a piece of research that said construction is only just ahead of agriculture and hunting in terms of its level of digitization. Admittedly, that was an American piece of research, but they found in Europe construction was bottom of all of the industries that they looked at. So we have to overcome that underinvestment in IT. We have also to overcome a misconception that IT is expensive and costly. IT delivers, in my view, efficiency improvements. It pays for itself very, very quickly. And if you look at wider society, most people are using mobile phones, they're using tablets, they're using laptops, day in, day out. There is no reason why people should be still reverting back to paper. There are still organizations that insist on getting some information in paper format or electronic paper format. But that we are a much more professional industry, much more capable of dealing with complexity through clever use of the technology that we have at our fingertips. And I think also we have to overcome the aversion that the industry used to have about sharing information. This is an industry which is notoriously adversarial, often resorts to litigation, and knowledge is power in those circumstances. And so people are sometimes a little bit protective about how much information they share, and also careful about any liabilities that they might have But there are ways in which we can encourage collaboration, not just through the sharing of technology, but by being more astute about the forms of contracts and the types of insurances that we have around our projects.
So, do you think that reluctance to share is part of why construction in general has been slow on the uptake on IT?
I think it has. It certainly was in the early days, and also there was nervousness about what was seen as potentially cutting edge technology. You mentioned software as a service, for example. If we go back 20 years to when that was first emerging in the UK construction market, people were very nervous about their data being in the cloud, as the phrase was. They wanted it within their firewall on their local network, ideally, not shared with anybody. So we've had to overcome people's suspicions, concerns about security, concerns about liabilities, and so on. But that's taken a while. But it's also been helped by wider adoption of technology. As I said, we routinely use mobile phones in our day-to-day life, and we share information in a way on social media that probably makes some construction traditionalists cringe. But this is the reality of working, and I think it's often the newer entrants to the profession who are much more open to the adoption of new technology and the routine use and sharing of information in their day-to-day jobs. A couple of things that have also helped. One was COVID-19.
Okay.
It demonstrated that you didn't need to be in an office and you didn't need to be on a local area network in order to share information. So it meant that we could, the technology enabled organizations to continue to work effectively, and in some cases even more effectively, because they were enabling flexible working. And then also we're starting to see new client demands and new industry demands from legislation on things like building safety, which mean that information is increasingly going to be demanded in electronic formats. You won't have the option of reverting back to paper because the legislation will require it to be shared electronically.
Yeah, I mean, really good points there in terms of the advancements, and it's strange how circumstances out of your control can speed things up or slow things down, and in this turn it certainly sped things up. You had a point there where you were saying that everything was behind a firewall, and it was a lot more closely guarded in terms of information and data. Do you think that that's potentially damaging on the uptake or the integration to the wider community of data? Because I know working in previous organizations, they had their own way of storing data and information on their own systems, and various different codes or however they implement it. And then if they're going to open that up, you're coming up against other organizations with their own types of data storage and documentation. Do you think that's a potential pitfall and something we're going to have to overcome more than other industries that were more open?
I think it's something that we have to address. To a large extent, the technology enables a lot of consistency in how people work. There's widespread adoption of common operating systems, Microsoft. People will often be setting up folders and files within those folders and so forth. And certainly the technologies that enable collaboration work on, they look like files-based, folder-based systems. You've got registers of information. And I think working on common systems, which are increasingly widely deployed, brings about a level of increased standardization rather than people having bespoke filing structures. They can see what works well in a technology that other people are currently using. And they start then to converge on emerging standards, let's say. So if we think about the BIM journey that we've been on for the last 10 years, A lot of the early work in terms of developing the international standards started in the UK through people beginning to identify what were common practices, what were common processes, because BIM is essentially, it's not a technology, it's a process. And it was what we engaged in the UK was creating a series of prototype standards. The PASs, PAS 1192 was the main set of these publicly available specifications at the time. These developed into what eventually became the ISO standard, ISO 19650. So the UK was right at the heart of developing a lot of the standardized approaches that are now commonplace in deployment of BIM, not just in the UK, but right around the world. We have a lot of crossover with other economies who are now using the ISO standards as the basis for their development of built environment information using building information modeling approaches.
That's really interesting, and it leads me on to the next point. So, we've got these things in place to make sure it's more structured, and it sounds like the UK was quite well advanced from that perspective. But there was a quote in Construction Europe by a chap called Paul McCormack, innovation manager at Belfast Metropolitan College, and he stated that the construction sector is increasingly struggling with how to gather data in a coordinated fashion across the entire sector supply chain. But by upskilling the workforce initially to master the digital fundamentals and then to utilize BIM to gather the data, the sector can then organize, store, and extract value from the data. I thought it highlighted quite nicely where we are as an industry, quite well. Do you agree with this? And what are your thoughts, or where should we be looking to train and upskill people so we can better use data and BIM as a process in the future?
I think when it comes to upskilling people, and that's really, I think, the core of what was talked about there. It helps that we have standards in place. It helps that we have common approaches to the way that we work. One of the tools that we have in the UK, for example, building on the standards, is a thing called the UK BIM framework, which is the overarching framework for delivering work. And so a lot of the upskilling is based around helping people use the guidelines, use the, it's not just the standards, but there's a host of other material, and it's all freely available on the UK BIM framework website. So there's lots of resources there that can form part of that upskilling, part of that training and education process. But it's very clear that it's not about the technology. Successful collaboration is certainly, in my view, and most of the people in NEMA would agree, it's successful collaboration is 90% people and process. So it is about bringing organizations, their processes and their people up to speed, but also offering that opportunity for organizations to sometimes use technology to their advantage. Certainly adoption of technology and the fact that an employer is using the latest technology can make that organization more attractive to new recruits. So it also makes construction potentially more attractive than it might have been when it was seen as dirty and dangerous, and full of people in wellies and hard hats and high-vis jackets. The view that you can have of construction now can be very much different when you show, for example, people working in a design environment using not just the 3D aspects of working, which many people associate with BIM, but also the much wider opportunities to be capturing information through drones, through laser surveys, through clever use of visualization techniques, including photogrammetry, and then being able to explore virtual reality worlds or mixed reality worlds. that's really where construction can be seen to be not just lagging behind, but actually ahead of the game in some senses. Very much cutting edge in its opportunities for people joining the profession, and for organisations wanting to be seen to be more innovative to their clients.
Yeah, we'll come on to emerging trends and technology in a little while, and I find it quite not an advanced industry, I wouldn't say that, but quite innovative in their approaches to a lot of things, and when that technology does become integrated for some organizations, it can massively help them. But having said that, some of the terminology and if you're not used to it, can be quite confusing, I would say. And there's one company that I think breaks that down quite well in terms of what this means and answering the more simplistic questions, or maybe not simplistic questions, but questions that make things sound a little answers that make things sound a little simpler, and that's NBS. And I think to upskill, people really need to get to grips with these terminologies and understand that it's not, the terminologies are usually more complex than using the actual tech. So if you look at BIM specifically, I remember, oh God, many years ago, going to a half an hour talk about somebody that using BIM, and they started talking about 2D and 3D. And in a bit of research, I noticed there's like 8D, I think people are talking about. Even that itself is quite confusing if you're not into that kind of thing, because you just think 3D, you think what that means visually.
Yeah.
So can you just walk us through these kind of dimensions, if you like, or advancements in BIM? And is there a better way to categorize them and describe what the heck all these different things are?
Yeah. I mean, the traditional dimensions are height, length, and width. That's the 3D bit. You can add the fourth dimension, which is one of time. So you can look at how a design might evolve over a timeline. That's really beginning to animate something that way. But those are, I think, in my view, mainly the what we would regard as dimensions. The institutions, institutional structural engineers wouldn't regard cost, for example, or so we get into 5D. Some people call cost the fifth dimension, but it's not a dimension. It's not something you can tangibly see or perceive in the process. It's an attribute more than anything. And particularly when you get beyond 5D, I saw somebody yesterday talking about an approach which they called 5D plus. And they were starting to talk about that in terms of what it meant for decarbonisation. But there's confusion there. And some people put 6D down as whole life. They talk about a dimension which relates to how you use information for whole life purposes, for facilities management, for asset management, and so on. I think it's a lot easier to avoid those kinds of things and just talk about whole life use of information. That's what we'll be doing in April 2024. NEMA has a virtual conference, and the theme of the whole day will be about maximizing value through using information for whole life management of the built environment.
I think that's what we should be doing anyway, really, with the tech. It's looking at lifetime, and like we were talking about earlier, it's very much about the longevity of the building and that technology, which will change a lot quicker than the buildings do, but making sure that it is scalable and usable in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
I helped write a code of practice last year on interoperability in the built environment. So it was a code of practice, an interoperability code of practice for technologies. And interoperability is basically the ability for information to be shared between users and exchanged in a way that doesn't require reliance upon a proprietary technology. So, if we can make that, make information more interoperable, we reduce our reliance on solutions which might get dated and prevent us accessing information because the software is no longer available, or the software a new version of the software has come out and the old version is no longer supported. Certainly the principles that we put in place in that code of practice, one of the key ones was longevity. It's recognizing that for a client organization, different to a construction team, for a client organization, their responsibility for managing that asset might be decades. And even at the end of those decades, they may have a further obligation in terms of recycling or dismantling and repurposing elements of that piece of infrastructure, so that we can make new use of materials or fresh use of the facility itself.
And that's one part that a lot of people forget, is the end of use, end of life, decommissioning part of the
Yeah,
build. It's all focused on building it up, but it's easy to forget the breaking it down part as well.
yeah. There is a phrase that we'll be talking about it at the conference in April, about design for disassembly, which
Okay.
envisages that you have components that could potentially be taken, rather than being demolished, the building could be dismantled and broken down into constituent parts, some of which could be reused, some of which could be then efficiently recycled. You don't end up with a demolition process where steel, concrete, and other materials are all mixed together, and most of it ends in landfill. The demolition industry is actually quite advanced in how it takes materials arising from demolition and repurposes it. But it could be made a lot simpler if designers designed in such a way that they made that end process of recycling and repurposing easier. So that's really where we're starting to see some interesting developments there.
That's cool. So I want to finish on the future then, really. And
Yeah.
the more we look to the future, as I think we've we've just touched upon, is the emergence of things like smart buildings, utilizing the IoT, Internet of Things, that seamless integration in how the industry works, and then all the other various tech which we mentioned on this podcast, and you mentioned as well, AR, VR, 3D printing, MMC, of course. And these are becoming less futuristic and more commonplace. But what I'd love to get your take on what emerging trends, technologies excite you, and what we should keep a closer eye on into the future.
Yeah, I mean, we went through a period during the teenies where BIM was the buzzword. IoT became a buzzword. We went through AR and VR being buzzwords, and digital twin is another buzzword we're hearing a lot about. There are different definitions of it depending upon which organizations, or even which countries, which organizations in which countries you refer to. But from my side of things, the buzzword of choice at the moment seems to be around AI. Ever since ChatGPT came out last year, we've had no end of people suddenly excited about the possibilities of AI. But construction industry has been working in this way for some years. The whole principles around how we design buildings and how we explore different options, that they exploit the opportunities that come from AI already. We've got generative design processes where designers can flex building structures and explore hundreds of different options, almost at the click of a switch once they've generated once they've put in their parameters. But sometimes there's also opportunities that come, and I've mentioned the data capture side of things. We're able now to explore the existing environment in far more detail and create better perspectives on how a building will fit into its local environment through laser scanning and photogrammetry and so forth. And it's hooking. The opportunity comes if you start to think whole life about how we use that early data stage, right at the early stages of planning, before we even get into detailed design and through construction. But also, how we then incorporate not just the IoT opportunities of smart buildings, but also think about the wider digital twin. How we build connected cities where public transport and other infrastructure services, non-sensitive data about those is made commonly available. I use open data on a routine basis every day, just to know when a bus is coming or when a train is going from my local station, because it's updated in real time. That kind of real time update provides a rich way of interacting with your built environment. You're not just, it's not just looking at a Google map, but your Google map will actually tell you when a bus is going to come, to that bus stop, or when your target train is going to be leaving your local railway station. So and they do that in real time. It's not just on the basis of a timetable. That's really powerful in terms of helping people interact with their built environment, but also to explore it and understand it. If they can they start clicking on things and seeing, oh yes, this building's really energy efficient, or this building is I can access raw data about the humidity or temperature or what have you. They can start to make informed choices about about what environment that they want to work in, and how they can manage that environment to make it healthier and more comfortable for themselves.
Because the previous 3 episodes, there was one with Becky Valentine. We spoke about building health, which was all about monitoring and highlighting these things you can do to have a better healthy environment and make the building work for us as humans. Then we looked at photogrammetry and capturing reality with Derek Lawrence. And then we were talking about digital transformation with Henry Fenby Taylor, which has led up to this episode, which is all about BIM. And BIM is probably the one that connects all those things together, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it provides kind of like a spine, an information spine to a whole host of activity. And as I say, it's a process. So it's an information-driven process. So if we're producing data, for particular purposes, it supports that process right through from the very earliest stages where people are, still thinking conceptually about what they might want to do with or what they might require, because we're often starting with the end in mind. That's all about requirements. Start with the end in mind and making sure that we keep that end in mind all the way through the process, so that everybody is geared towards the same objective. If we're focused on what we can do to maximize value, it's about, particularly when we're talking about climate change and global warming, we're going to be increasingly focused not just upon delivering buildings, but delivering buildings and other infrastructure, which is as energy efficient as possible, as resource efficient as possible, and provides the best whole life solution, something which is really resilient and capable of long-term use.
Fantastic. Great way to finish that. I feel a great way to finish this conversation on that statement, because it just highlights BIM as it needs to be highlighted, and all the benefits that come with using that process. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been so interesting. Although BIM seems to be this thing that ties it all together, it's always excellent to get behind the actual letters and find out how it is actually used and what it can be used for. So thank you so much for coming on today. I really do appreciate it.
No problem at all. And anybody that wants more information should just go and have a look at the NEMA website, which is at wearenema.im. I look after some of that website, so you can find more information about BIM and the things we've been talking about today there.
Excellent. And all the links will be in the show notes as usual. Right. Thanks once again, Paul.